Hello guys, welcome to the channel and welcome to another episode of Weapons of Today. I am your host Mitchell, and in today's episode we're going to be covering the Aug. Okay, so the Aug in German language translates to a universal army rifle, and which exactly it is a universal army rifle, and the term universal army rifle is actually used for being a modular weapon. And a modular rifle is a rifle which can be completely changed by the user, modded, and can be completely configured by the user / the operator. And for example, the Styer. The Styer is a perfect example of a bullpup rifle. If you want to turn the Styer into a carbine, you can put the short barrel on it and it will basically turn into a carbine. And if you want a rifle variant of the Styer, the Styer H is available, which has a long barrel and a 7.62 magazine. And if you want to get gritty on long ranges, the long range sniper rifle variant is also available of the Styer. So that is what a modular weapon is, which can be completely changed, completely customized by the user and by the way that the user wants it to be. And that is exactly what the Aug is. The Aug is a universal army / a modular bullpup rifle. So what is a bullpup rifle, you might ask? A bullpup rifle is a rifle which has a magazine behind the trigger. For example, the Aug, Groza, Type 95, L85A2, L85A1, and the FAMAS. So that is what a bullpup rifle is, the rifle which has a magazine behind the trigger. And let's talk about the history of bullpups. So the bullpup design was actually designed by an English gunsmith in 1901. But of course it was a first generation and it failed, and the gunsmith kind of managed to make the rifle short by making it into a bullpup, but the recoil was absolutely brutal and it wasn't adopted because of that, and it kind of failed. And we kind of saw the bullpup again in the 1950s by a gunsmith, Jason. He produced the EM1 and EM2, and the British forces actually adopted that rifle and used it for a year and kind of dropped it for some political issues. We're going to talk about that in a separate video. I'm going to make a separate video on the EM2 and EM1, but in today's video we have to focus on the Aug. Okay, so the Aug has a rate of fire of 680 to 750 rounds per minute, a muzzle velocity of 970 meters per second, and the effective range of the Aug is 300 meters, and it's chambered in 5.56 by 45 NATO and in 9 by 16 parabellum rounds. So the Aug is one of those weapons which has an inbuilt sighting system, which means it has a scope attached to it, and that scope is called the Swarovski 1.5 telescopic sight. And the Aug, of course, I told you, is a modular bullpup weapon. So a modular if it is a modular weapon, there are going to be a ton of different variants of that specific weapon. So the Aug, the standard Aug, the Aug assault rifle variant, has a 20-inch barrel, and there is also a submachine gun variant of the Aug, which is called the Aug Para, that fires 9 by 16 parabellum rounds, SMG rounds, and it has a very short barrel, about at the length of about 16 to 16.5 inch barrel. And of course it's a SMG, like MP5, like MPX, or the Uzi. It's Aug, but a SMG. And there is also a lightweight machine gun variant of the Aug, which has a extended magazine which holds up to 42 rounds, and it has a extended barrel of 24.4 inch, and it also has a bipod attached to it to increase stability. Now the reason for the bipod is, of course, if you're gonna make the barrel longer and longer on a weapon. It's gonna have some stability issues, and you'll need a bipod to increase the stability and the accuracy of that weapon. So let's talk about the history of AUG. How it was designed, why was it designed in the first place, and what it replaced, and what made it such a good weapon that it's used by the native countries that made it to this day. Okay, so the AUG was designed by Steyr, a famous company from Austria, and it was designed in 1977. It's also called as the STG-77. So the AUG was the first ever bullpup to ever serve a major military. The first military that it served was, of course, its native country, the native country Austria, which it served for first time, and a first major bullpup rifle that was ever adopted by the military, which definitely means something, is the AUG. And the AUG was adopted the following year in 1978 under the name of STG-77 to replace their old 7.62 STG-58, which was actually a licensed version of the FN-FAL. The AUG is still being used by them to this day, which goes on to show you how much great of a weapon it actually was. So what it replaced was the FN-FAL, which was old at the time, and it needed to change. The weapon needed to change, or just let's do something else, they said. And the AUG was exactly what they wanted, a 5.56 rifle. And the 5.56 at the time was becoming very popular among all of the NATO countries, and Austria wanted to try on the 5.56x45 NATO trend, and that's what exactly they did, and it kind of worked very good for them. Now let's talk about the adoption of the AUG by the Australian Army. So the year is 1988, 10 years after the adoption of the AUG by the Austrians, and the Australian Army wants to produce their primary rifle in their own country. So they actually went to Colt in America to get a license to produce the M16 rifles in their own country. And Colt basically denied the request to give the license to Australia. So Australia started to look for other options. Meanwhile, one of the more good options was the Styer Aug. So the Steyr gave permission to Australia to produce the AUG whenever and however they wanted, and wherever they wanted. So it was really important to Australians to keep the production of their primary rifle in their own country, so the AUG was their bread and butter, which sounds really great, by the way. And so basically what happened was the Australian Army did tests in 1988, and basically they compared the AUG to the M16, and they did a lot of tests, and in most of their tests the AUG was better than the M16, but you can deny on that because they actually wanted to keep the primary rifle to be made on their soil, which a lot of countries at the time wanted to do. And so you could say that's the reason why they made the AUG look better than the M16 to adopt it, and basically that they could produce it in their own country. Like, this is really controversial. You can find people on the both sides of the fences. Some people say that the AUG was a better weapon, completely better weapon than the M16, and whereas in those tests the AUG was the best weapon ever made, but for the M16 it just took a backsloth of a rifle and actually was made to look very bad, not a little, very bad. And the AUG in all of those tests were better. And one reason that you can deny on one specific evidence that goes against tests of the Australian Army is that the AUG was actually had a problem with the trigger system. So the trigger system in the AUG at the time was really annoying, or really not comfortable, you might say, because like any rifle in the world, many rifles in the world, they have a fire selector which you can conveniently change from semi-auto to full auto, or from semi-auto to burst if you're using the M16. Basically, you're not using the M16 anymore, right? You're using the M4, yeah. Tell me you're using the M4 or the AR-15 instead of the M16, dudes. Well, you cannot have M16s, can you? Nope. There was a law or a statement that you cannot use the M16s anymore, and basically civilians cannot own the M16s. Yeah. If you want a M16, you could just buy the AR-15 and configure it to look like M16, but you cannot buy the M16s up. So that's exactly what was wrong in the AUG, and the AUG had a trigger system which was really complicated, or simplified, you might say. If you press the trigger a little lightly, it will fire semi-auto rounds. If you pushed your finger with all the force, it will fire on full auto mode, which actually is controversial to this day. You could find people on both sides of the fences. Some people might say that it's better, you don't have to change your hand, you don't have to move your hand to change from semi-auto to full auto, and some people say that it's bad because if you're under stress, you're being fired on, you might fire in full auto instead of semi-auto, which might create a hassle of the rounds being wasted. And talking about the AUG and the M16, you could find people on both sides of the fences even to this day. Some people will say that the AUG was a overall better weapon than the Colt M16, and it was just a good thing for the Australians it was just a bread and butter for them to produce the rifle on their own soil. That is the defense of the AUG. And for the M16, basically you could go on the AUG trigger mechanism, semi-auto to full auto mechanism that goes. So actually in that testing, they showed that the AUG is actually better, as it can be conveniently changed from semi-auto to full auto, which, you ask me, it's not a good choice. It was the only thing that needed to be upgraded or to be changed, but they didn't. They say it was better than the other weapon systems at the time. So let's compare the AUG to its main competitor, the FAMAS. Okay, so both the AUG and the FAMAS entered in service in 1978, while AUG was the first bullpup to ever serve a military. The FAMAS was a French bullpup assault rifle, and both entered in service in the same year. The FAMAS was a little late than the AUG, and well, let's compare to the AUG and the FAMAS. So the AUG was a more reliable weapon system than the FAMAS, and it was a better overall weapon than the FAMAS. Of course, being modular, you could change the weapon however you want, but the only thing that the FAMAS did better than the AUG was the rate of fire. Okay, so the FAMAS had a rate of fire of 1100 rounds per minute, whereas the AUG only had the rate of fire of 750 rounds per minute, and that is the only thing that FAMAS did better than the AUG. But the FAMAS at the time was having a lot of problems, such as faulty magazines and the muzzles catching on fire. Yeah, and by muzzles catching on fire, I mean basically the muzzles melting, you know, due to that heavy recoil that we talked about. Okay guys, that is it for today's video. We will catch you guys in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, comment down below.